I drive the narrow mountain road in silence, the engine's low growl muffled by the pine-scented air that presses against the windows. My headlights carve a thin line through the dusk, illuminating the occasional broken patch of road where the asphalt has split like cracked skin. I glance at the dashboard, temperature 68, humidity 45, details I habitually record, even when I'm nowhere near a lab. The case file on my lap is a thin PDF of spore counts and necropsy reports, each line a reminder of why I left Colorado's flat plains for this remote outpost. My curls, wild as ever, are pulled back into a loose braid that slides against the back of my neck. I can feel the dampness of my scalp through the wool of my coat, a subtle reminder of the fire-crowned legend my mother whispered before the house went up in flames. The town of Pine Hollow steadies itself against the night, a cluster of dim windows and a lone diner whose neon sign sputters coffee. I park beside the sheriff's office, the gravel crunching under my tires. The building's porch is lit by a single lantern that throws a pool of amber onto the cracked stone. I step out, the cold snapping at my cheeks, and inhale the sharp blend of pine sap and burning wood from a nearby hearth. My boots thud against the wooden steps, each footfall echoing the rhythm of a heart I rarely let hear. "Detective Larkin?" A deep voice calls from the doorway, rich with gravel and a faint scent of pine resin. I turn to see a man leaning against the frame, his silver-gray eyes catching the lantern light like polished steel. A scar slices down his jaw, a pale line that catches the firelight when he moves. He's taller than I expected, his shoulders broad, the muscles in his forearms hinted beneath the rough fabric of his shirt. He adjusts the strap of a leather satchel and lets a low chuckle escape. "Liam Mercer," I say, because the badge on his chest makes the name formal, though the way his stare lingers a fraction longer on the crown of my curls feels anything but. "I'm here about the deer deaths. I've run the spore analysis and—" "Spore analysis," he repeats, the words tasting like curiosity more than dismissal. He steps aside, gesturing toward the porch, ready to see the field. The wolves are still out there, and the deer weren't the only ones that didn't make it. I swallow, the taste of pine resin on my tongue turning metallic. The fear that has been a quiet undercurrent since I left my hometown presses against my ribs, a pressure I've learned to mask with scientific precision. "I'll need to see the tracks first," I say, voice steadier than I feel. He leads me past the sheriff's office, the wooden floorboards creaking under our weight. The twilight deepens, turning the forest into a sea of shadows that sway with the wind. The ground beneath the trees is a carpet of pine needles, each one crisp under my boots, releasing a faint, earthy perfume that reminds me of my mother's garden after rain. We stop at a clearing where a group of wolves circles a carcass, their fur bristling, eyes reflecting the dying light. One of them, larger than the rest, lifts a massive paw and snarls, a low rumble that vibrates through the air. I can feel the tremor on my skin, the way the wolf's breath fogs the cool night. "You see that?" Liam whispers, his voice barely above the rustle of leaves. He steps forward, his silhouette merging with the darkness, and I notice the subtle flex of his muscles as he crouches, palm resting on the damp earth. He lifts a piece of bark, turning it over with a practiced flick. Fresh blood. Not just the deer, something else. A sudden crack snaps through the silence, a branch snapping under an unseen weight. The wolves snap their heads toward the sound, ears pricking, and the lead wolf snarls louder, baring teeth that glint like moonlit ice. My breath catches. The scent of wild garlic and damp moss fills my nostrils, but a sharper, acrid note cuts through smoke. I glance up at the canopy and see a thin plume of orange threading through the branches, as if someone had tossed a match into the forest. My hand instinctively reaches for the notebook in my pocket, the one filled with observations and hypotheses, but the notebook is gone. I feel the empty space where paper should be, a phantom weight that mirrors the void in my chest when I think about my mother's fire. My curls flutter as a gust brushes the clearing, and a stray spark catches a loose curl near my scalp. The flame licks the hair, bright and fleeting, and for a heartbeat I see a sigil, an intricate spiral of fire etched in the ember before it fizzles out. Liam's eyes widen, the silver gray flashing with something I can't name. He lifts a hand, not to touch but to keep the flame from spreading, his fingers brushing the side of my face as if to steady me. The contact is electric, the warmth of his palm a contrast to the chill that clings to my bones. He pulls back, his breath a faint mist on my cheek, and his voice drops to a low growl. "Stay close," he says, and I hear the command hidden in the words, a reminder that he is used to leading a pack, not a lone scientist. I nod, the motion hesitant, the curl that burns still smoldering in my mind. The wolves, agitated, begin to circle faster, their howls rising in a crescendo that seems to echo off the distant cliffs. I can taste the metallic tang of fear, the same taste that rises whenever I'm near someone who could see the mark I have tried to hide all my life. "Do you have any idea what caused the spores?" I ask, trying to anchor the conversation in my expertise, but the question feels thin against the thrum of the forest's pulse. Liam crouches beside the carcass, his fingers digging into the fur with a careful reverence. "You'll find the answer in the soil, Ava," he says, using the name I never told anyone else. "But there's something else, something that's not just fungus." He pulls a small, leather-bound journal from his satchel, the cover darkened with age. The pages are filled with cramped, inked symbols that look like a mix of runes and scientific notes. He flips to a page marked with a red feather, the ink smudged where his thumb has lingered. "The Blackthorns tried a ritual last month," he murmurs, eyes scanning the cramped script. "Failed. They left a residue that's killing the forest. I've seen it before, something that burns without flame." I stare at the page, the letters a mess of old language and his own shorthand. My mind races, connecting the sigil on my scalp to the glyphs, the fire-crowned legends my mother whispered. A cold dread slides down my spine. Yet another part of me, my scientific core, lights up with curiosity. If it's a residue, I can isolate it. I need a sample, though. He tilts his head, studying me as if weighing whether to trust the woman whose hair bears a mark his pack has feared for centuries. "You'll need to come with me," he says, voice softened, the edge of command slipping into something else, a protectiveness that feels foreign to the alpha's usual demeanor. I glance at the wolves, at the dying deer, at the flickering orange in the canopy. The pull of the unknown, the promise of discovery, and the faint, steady thrum of his presence coalesce into a pressure I can't ignore. Still, the thought of staying, of being bound to a pack that sees me as a cursed omen, knits a knot in my gut. "Fine," I say, every syllable clipped as if I'm measuring the weight of each word. "But I'm not staying longer than necessary." He nods, a hint of a smile flickering on his lips before he tucks the journal back. He steps back, his coat rustling, and gestures toward a narrow trail that disappears into a thicket of spruce. "Follow me. We'll reach the crystal cavern before sunrise. If the spores are in the crystal, we'll have a chance to stop the spread." I trail behind him, the forest closing in around us like a living thing. The ground is soft, damp, each step releasing the scent of moss and loam, the dampness clinging to the soles of my boots. My breath forms a steady rhythm, matching the subtle thump of my heart, though I can hear his steps ahead, the cadence deeper, more resonant, almost like a drumbeat echoing my own. As we walk, Liam's shoulders brush the edge of my coat occasionally, the friction sending a shiver up my spine. I notice how his breath, warm and scented with pine, brushes my cheek, and a part of me wants to lean into it, to let the warmth linger. Another part, the part that has spent years building walls as thick as bark, pulls me back, keeping my shoulders rigid. He stops abruptly at a small clearing where moonlight filters through the treetops, painting silver patterns on the fallen leaves. He crouches, gesturing for me to do the same. "Look," he says, pointing to a patch of ground where a faint, blue-tinged fungus glows faintly, its cap like a tiny lantern. "That's what we're after." I kneel, the cold earth seeping through my trousers, and lean forward, my fingers hovering over the fungus. The scent hits me first, sharp, metallic, like a cut. I lower my glove, feeling the delicate mycelium against my skin, a texture that feels both fragile and alive. My mind catalogs the data: spore size, luminescence, moisture content. My recorder clicks, capturing a whisper of sound that I hope will be enough to explain the deaths back in Pine Hollow. Liam watches me, his gaze steady, an unspoken question lingering in the space between us. My hands shake ever so slightly, not from the cold but from the awareness that he can see the tremor, that he can read my insecurity like a map. "I'll take a sample," I say, holding up a small vial, the glass catching the moonlight. "We'll need it for the lab." He nods, the scar on his jaw catching the light as he leans closer. "Be careful, that fungus is volatile. One wrong move and—" Before he can finish, a rustle erupts from the shrubbery. A wolf larger than the rest lunges out, teeth bared, eyes ablaze with hunger. My heart spikes, a primal terror surfacing despite my rational mind. Instinctively, I fling the vial forward, the liquid inside splashing onto the wolf's snout. It recoils, the scent of the fungus burning its nostrils, a howl tearing from its throat. Liam reacts in an instant, his body moving with the fluid grace of a predator. He drops to all fours, muscles rippling, fur bristling as a low growl rolls from his throat. The wolf circles, snarling, but Liam stands his ground, eyes locked, the silver gray flashing like twin moons. For a heartbeat, the forest holds its breath. The only sounds are the wind through the pines and the faint crackle of the fire-crowned curl that still smolders in my mind. Then the wolf snarls again and retreats, disappearing into the darkness as quickly as it appeared. Liam rises, his breath heavy, his eyes still fixed on me. "You saved both of us," he says, the words laced with something that sounds like admiration, but also a warning. "But you also exposed the mark." I swallow, feeling the heat of his words settle in my throat. The curl on my scalp may have been just a spark, but now I understand why the legend clings to my family like ash. The danger is not just in the forest, it's in the stories that bind us, the old fears that linger in the shadows of each pack's council. We stand there, the night pressing in around us, the moon a thin slice above, the fire-crowned mark a secret that now blazes between us. My mind reels with questions: who else knows of the prophecy? What will the elders do when they learn of my involvement? And yet, as I look at Liam, I notice the way his brow furrows when he hunches, the way his hands, calloused from years of hunting, tremble just enough to betray his own fear of losing control. We begin walking back toward the town, the path now slick with dew, each step echoing the unspoken pact forming between us. We need each other to survive, but the world we belong to insists we remain apart. The distance between my scientific certainty and his primal leadership stretches like a rope taut with tension, ready to snap or to hold us together. At the edge of the pine forest, where the road reappears, Liam stops and looks back at the trees, his silhouette framed by moonlight. "We'll come back tomorrow," he says, voice low, "to get more samples. The crystal cavern might hold the answer." I nod, feeling the weight of his stare linger on my back. The car engine sputters to life, a soft roar that seems both promising and foreboding. As I climb into the passenger seat, I catch a glimpse of his reflection in the rearview mirror, silver-gray eyes softened by something that could be concern, or perhaps the first thread of something deeper. I rub the back of my neck, the place where my curls usually rest, and feel a faint pulse, like a heartbeat trapped beneath the skin. The car rolls forward, tires crunching over gravel, leaving a trail of tire marks that fade into the night. I pull my notebook close, the blank pages waiting for the data I've collected, but my mind is already drifting to the next day, to the cavern, to the crystal that might save a forest and tear us apart. The night air brushes against the window, carrying with it the scent of pine, smoke, and the faint, lingering ember of a curse I have yet to understand. The pine-scented air grew colder as we left the edge of the clearing, the forest swallowing our footsteps like a soft blanket. I pulled the coat tighter around my shoulders, the wool pressing against the base of the curl that still smelled faintly of singed cedar. Liam walked a few paces ahead, his silhouette a dark slash against the silvered trunks, the scar on his jaw catching the moonlight each time he turned his head. I could hear the crunch of pine needles under his boots, a rhythmic counterpoint to the thrum of my own pulse. He stopped before a fallen cedar, its bark split open like a wound in the earth. "There," he said, voice low, "the soil's been contaminated near the roots. The spore pattern we're tracking follows the water line down there." He knelt, fingers digging into the damp loam, the tips of his nails, stained with dark ash, scraping the surface. I crouched beside him, the cold seeping through my trousers, and steadied my breath as I watched a thin veil of mist rise from the ground. My recorder clicked, capturing the soft hiss of moisture evaporating, and I leaned forward, eyes tracing the faint, blue-tinged fungus clinging to the moss. The scent hit me first, a sharp, metallic tang that reminded me of blood, but layered with the sweet, earthy perfume of damp pine. I inhaled deliberately, cataloging the odor in my mind, noting how it reminded me of the night my mother's house burned, of the ash that settled on my curls when I was a child. "Looks like it's feeding off the mineral runoff from the old quarry up the ridge," Liam murmured, his breath forming a pale cloud against my cheek. A stray gust lifted a few loose curls, and I caught the movement, the way the tip of a strand trembled before settling back against my scalp. I felt his hand brush the back of my neck in accidental graze, but his palm lingered for a heartbeat, the heat of his skin contrasting with the chill of the night. "Do you think the quarry water's carrying something extra?" I asked, voice barely above the wind rustling through the pines. My fingers traced the edge of a stone, feeling its roughness, the way the surface was pitted with tiny craters, like a map of old battles. He paused, eyes narrowing as he stared at the fungus. If the blackthorns tried a ritual, they could have tainted the runoff. Their symbols, those spirals we saw on the bark, match the sigil that flared on your head. He glanced at me, the silver in his eyes flashing with something that could have been curiosity or warning. "You said you've never seen that before." I clenched my jaw, the memory of the fleeting flame snapping behind my eyelid. No, it was a spark, an accident. The lie felt thin, like a paper curtain over a roaring fire. My mind raced. If the elders learn that my mark is linked to the ritual, they will demand my exile. Yet if I stay, I might learn what my mother's dying whispers meant. A sudden crack snapped through the trees, sharper than the earlier branch snap. A shadow flickered between trunks, and for a fraction of a second I saw the glint of metal, something metallic, maybe a knife or a talisman caught in a low branch. I turned my head, but the forest swallowed the movement, leaving only the echo of rustling leaves. Liam stood abruptly, his posture tightening. "We're not alone." He lifted his hand, fingers curling around the hilt of a worn leather sheath that held a small, curved blade more ceremonial than functional, the handle etched with runes I didn't recognize. The blade caught the moonlight, a thin line of silver. My throat tightened, the taste of pine resin becoming metallic. "Someone's watching," he replied, voice a low growl that seemed to merge with the wind. He stepped back, creating a small circle of cleared ground, his shoulders broadening to shield me. I felt the pressure of his body against mine, the heat radiating from his skin, and a strange, involuntary shiver ran through my spine. My curls brushed against his forearm, the singed scent faintly rising again, as if the fire within me reacted to his proximity. "Stay still," he whispered, and I forced my hands to remain where they were, the recorder hanging loose from my belt. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the owls muted, the usual night chorus replaced by a low, humming vibration that resonated in the ground beneath our feet. I could feel it in my bones, a tremor that matched the low thrum of my own heart, a rhythm that felt both alien and intimate. From the darkness, a low howl rose, not from a wolf but from something deeper, a mournful note that seemed to come from the very trees. Liam's jaw tightened, the scar on his jaw casting a shadow over his lip. "They're testing us," he said, more to himself than to me, "testing the boundaries of the pact." I wanted to ask what pact he meant, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I reached for the vial of sample I had taken earlier, the glass cool against my palm. My fingers trembled, the slight tremor betraying the steadiness I projected. I turned the vial over, watching the liquid swirl a phosphorescent green that pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat trapped in amber. "Can you?" I began, but he cut me off with a small, sharp nod. He stepped forward, his boots sinking into the soft earth, and knelt beside me. His hand hovered over the vial, then withdrew, as if weighing the decision. "I can't let you carry it alone," he said, tone edged with something that might have been protectiveness, or perhaps the burden of a leader refusing to show weakness. I glanced at his face, the night highlighting the lines that had formed around his eyes, the small scar near his temple that I hadn't noticed before. There was a flicker of something regret in his gaze, and I felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. He was a man bound by duty, yet his shoulders sagged ever so slightly under the weight of expectations he never asked for. "Put it in the pack's satchel," I suggested, my voice steadier than I felt. "If the elders see it, they'll know. They'll see it, and they'll decide I'm a traitor," he finished for me, a bitter edge to his words. The air around us seemed to tighten, the pine scent now mingled with the metallic tang of my blood, which I hadn't realized was seeping from a small nick on my finger, an accidental cut from the jagged bark earlier. A thin line of red glistened, catching the moonlight. He reached out, his fingers brushing the wound, and I flinched, the contact sending a jolt of heat through the scar on his jaw, as if his own pain mirrored mine. "Hold still," he murmured, pressing a gentle pressure that made the blood sting less. The gesture was brief, almost clinical, yet the lingering warmth of his palm lingered on my skin longer than necessary. A distant howl cracked the night again, this time followed by the rustle of movement, large shapes shifting among the pines. Shadows moved with purpose, and a thin silhouette slipped behind a boulder, clutching something wrapped in a dark cloth. I saw the glint of a medallion, the same symbol I had glimpsed on the journal page, a spiral of fire encircled by thorns. Liam's eyes snapped to the spot, his head tilting as he tried to see through the darkness. "Someone's left a marker," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "And it's not ours." I swallowed, the taste of iron sharp on my tongue, and felt the curl on my scalp thrum, an unbidden spark of warmth that seemed to pulse in time with the distant beating of drums I could barely hear. The forest around us felt alive, each leaf trembling as if anticipating a storm. We stood there, the space between us charged with unspoken questions. Liam's hand lingered near my shoulder, the fingers hovering just off my skin, as if he could reach for something without actually touching. My own hand rested on the satchel, the leather rough against my palm, grounding me. The night held its breath, the scent of pine, smoke, and my own lingering ember intertwining, creating a heady mixture that clung to the back of my throat. "Come back with me tomorrow," he finally said, the command softened by the fatigue in his voice. "We'll need more samples and the council." I cut him off with a half smile, the corners of my mouth twitching despite the tension. "And I'll bring the lab equipment. You'll have to tolerate a scientist's curiosity." He let out a short, humor-tinged bark. "I'll try not to burn the lab down." The words landed between us, a thin veil of banter that hid the crack in his composure. The wind shifted, carrying with it a faint, distant chime, metal striking metal, like a bell far away. It was a sound that didn't belong to the forest, a reminder that something else, something human, was moving near to the ridge. Both of us sensed it, our eyes flicking toward the horizon where the outlines of a small cabin emerged, its windows dark. "Someone's coming," Liam said, the edge in his voice sharpening. He turned, offering his arm. "Stay close, Ava. We'll move as one." I took his arm, the leather of his shirt rough against my fingertips, and felt the steadiness of his grip, the faint tremor that betrayed his own fear. Together we stepped into the deeper darkness, the fire-crowned curl on my scalp, a secret still burning just beneath the surface, and the promise of an alliance reluctant, fragile, and edged with danger trailing behind us like the scent of pine after a storm. The wind pushed cold through the pine boughs as I slipped the vial into my pack, the glass humming against the leather. Liam's silhouette loomed beside the fallen cedar, his shoulders rigid, eyes scanning the dark like a predator measuring horizons. I could feel the ache in my wrist where the scar on his jaw brushed the faint cut on my finger, a heat that lingered longer than the bite of the night. "Your breath's frosting the edge of that rock," he muttered, finger nudging the slab of quartz that glistened with a thin film of ice. "If the water's still contaminated, the spores could spread to the lower valley by morning." I knelt, the damp earth clinging to the cuffs of my trousers, and inhaled the metallic tang of the fungus mixed with the sweet sap of pine. The runoff follows the old quarry's drainage. If the blackthorns dumped anything, they could have seeded the whole watershed. A snap cracked a branch far off, and a shadow peeled away from a ridge, clutching something wrapped in charcoal black cloth. My stomach tightened. I glanced at Liam, his jaw set, the scar catching a sliver of moonlight. He lifted a hand, palm hovering over the satchel, then fell back, as if the very thought of touching me might set something loose. "Stay here," he said, voice low but edged with a warning that vibrated through the pine needles. "I'll check the ridge." I wanted to follow, to be the one who steadied his step, but the weight of the satchel anchored me. Instead, I watched his silhouette merge with the darkness, the soft thud of his boots disappearing into the underbrush. The air shifted, carrying a faint smell of iron and burnt resin, my mother's fire, the smell that had haunted me in the house's ashes. I swallowed, feeling the curl at the crown of my head stir, a faint warmth blooming along the spine of my neck. A low, guttural howl rose from somewhere deeper in the woods, not a wolf's call but a mournful vibration that seemed to echo off the cavern walls. The sound made the hair on my arms rise. I slipped a gloved hand into the satchel, feeling the cold curve of the crystal fragment we'd salvaged earlier, its surface pulsing with an azure light that matched the fungus's glow. Behind me, the rustle of leaves announced another presence. A figure slipped past the cedars, hooded, a glint of silver at the throat, perhaps a scout from the Blackthorns, perhaps a rogue hunter. I tightened my grip on the satchel, the resolve in my chest hardening like bark. When Liam returned, his coat was smeared with pine sap, his eyes flickering between me and the ridge. He dropped to one knee, fingers brushing the scarred bark, then lifted his gaze, meeting mine for a breath-long instant. The world narrowed to the space between us, the scent of his pine mingling with the faint ember still clinging to my curls. "Give me the vial," he whispered, the command softening as his hand hovered just inches from mine. My pulse hammered against my throat, the vial trembled in my grip, the green liquid swirling like a storm trapped in glass. I could feel the decision teetering: hand it over and trust the alpha, or keep it and risk the pack's anger. Before I could answer, a distant scream cracked the night, a human voice ragged with fear, carried on the wind from the ridge's edge. Liam's eyes narrowed, the scar catching the flash of resolve. He turned, gesturing toward the sound. "We go," he said, the word a promise and a warning. I followed, the satchel heavy against my hip, the curl on my scalp humming beneath the hood, the unknown figure disappearing into the shadows, and the iron taste of danger lingering on my tongue. I crouched at the mouth of the cavern, the cold stone biting at my fingertips as I steadied the lantern. The air inside thrummed with a low, humming vibration that seemed to pulse through my bones, like the echo of a distant drum. My breath fogged in thin ribbons, each exhale mingling with the faint, sweet scent of mineral water that seeped from the walls. I could hear the distant drip of water somewhere deeper, a metronome marking the passage of time while the world outside the opening stayed silent, the wind howling through the pines like a restless spirit. Liam stood a few paces ahead, his silhouette outlined by the faint blue glow of the fungus that clung to the cavern's ceiling like phosphorescent stars. His eyes, silver gray even in the dim light, flickered between the walls and the path ahead as if searching for something invisible. A thin line of frost traced the edge of his jaw where the scar met skin, catching the lantern's flame and turning it into a miniature mirror. He turned his head, and for a heartbeat our gazes locked. The curl at the crown of my head seemed to hum in response, a subtle warmth spreading along the nape of my neck. I swallowed, feeling the metallic taste of fear mingle with the pine resin that still clung to my coat. My notebook lay open on the ground, pages fluttering in the cavern's draft, and I could hear my own heartbeat thudding louder than the distant water. "Stay close," he murmured, his voice low enough that the cavern seemed to swallow it whole. He stepped forward, the crunch of his boots against the slick stone reverberating through the space. I matched his pace, my own boots leaving faint impressions in the damp loam. Every step felt like a negotiation between curiosity and caution, the knowledge that each inch brought us nearer to the crystal's heart and farther from the safety of the outside world. We reached the first chamber, a vaulted space where the walls were lined with veins of quartz that caught the lantern light and scattered it into shards of silver. In the center of the room lay a slab of crystal, its surface smooth and cool, an azure glow radiating from its core like a heartbeat caught in stone. I could feel the air around it thicken, the temperature dropping a few degrees, the scent of ozone snapping through my nose. "That's the source," Liam whispered, stepping closer. He knelt, his fingers brushing the crystal's edge with a reverence that made my throat tighten. The glow intensified, casting a pale light over his scar, highlighting the rawness of the line that ran down his jaw. He inhaled deeply, the scent of pine and mineral water mixing in his nostrils. I watched his breath fog the crystal surface, tiny droplets forming and then evaporating in an instant. My own breath hit my skin, a reminder that I was still human, still bound by the rules my training taught me: measure, observe, record. I raised my recorder, the click of its button sounding sharp against the humming resonance. "The frequency is off," I said, more to myself than to him. "It should be steady, but there's an irregular pulse, something's modulating it." Liam glanced up, his eyes narrowing as he considered my words. He reached out, his hand hovering just above the crystal, fingers trembling slightly. I felt a jolt of heat where his palm almost touched the stone, a sensation that seemed to travel up his arm and into his chest. He withdrew his hand quickly, as if a sudden pain had snapped through him. "It's reacting," he said, voice barely a whisper. "You're your mark, the fire-crowned sigil, it's amplifying whatever's in there." My mind raced. The sigil that had flared on my scalp earlier, the lingering ember of legend, now seemed less like a curse and more like a key. I felt the curl at the top of my head tighten, a faint prickling that matched the crystal's pulse. My scientific mind wanted to catalog, to hypothesize, but a deeper part of me, one that had spent years hiding behind equations, wanted to understand why I felt this pull. "Give me a sample," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "If I can isolate the resonance, maybe we can neutralize it." He nodded, his jaw tightening. He lifted a small, curved knife from his sheath, the blade etched with runes that caught the lantern's glow. The metal felt warm to the touch, as if the stone itself was heating it. He cut a thin sliver from the crystal's edge, the sound a soft chime that resonated through the cavern. I caught the piece in a vial, the greenish light pulsing inside like a captured heartbeat. The moment the fragment left the crystal, the glow dimmed slightly, as if the stone sighed. A low growl reverberated from the far wall, something moving, unseen, the sound of a massive thing shifting its weight. Liam's eyes snapped toward the darkness, muscles coiling beneath his furred coat. "Stay behind me," he said, the edge of command in his tone now softened by an almost paternal concern. He stepped forward, body low, shoulders hunched as if preparing for a strike. I followed, the vial clutched to my chest, the weight of the stone pressing against my side. The air grew colder, the scent of iron rising sharply, like the smell of blood in a wound. From the shadows, a shape emerged, a massive wolf, its fur black as midnight, eyes glowing amber, fur matted with the same phosphorescent fungus that clung to the cavern walls. Its snout twitched, nostrils flaring as it caught the scent of the crystal and of me. I could feel the heat of its breath on my skin, the subtle tremor in the ground beneath my boots. Liam's hand moved to the hilt of his blade, but instead of drawing, he lowered his body, a guttural sound escaping his throat. The wolf hesitated, its ears pivoting as if listening to something beyond the cavern's walls. I felt my own pulse quicken, the curl on my head brushing against the back of my neck, a raw, electric sensation that seemed to connect me to the creature. "Do not fight it," I whispered, surprising myself with the authority in my voice. "The fungus, its spores are binding it. If we can disperse the spores, it might calm." Liam glanced at me, his silver eyes narrowing. He seemed to weigh my words, then, with a swift motion, he pressed his palm against the crystal fragment in my hand. A faint blue light spread from the vial, seeping into the stone's fissure. The wolf's growl softened, its body lowering as if the tension in its muscles released. The amber eyes dimmed, replaced by a dull, almost human weariness. The cavern fell into a hushed silence, broken only by the distant drip of water and the soft rustle of fungus spores settling onto the stone floor. I exhaled, feeling the cool air fill my lungs, the metallic tang in my mouth evaporating. My hands were still shaking, the vial now empty, the crystal fragment having dissolved into the stone. Liam turned to me, his face illuminated by the waning glow. "You saved us both," he said, the words heavy with something unspoken. He stepped forward, close enough that I could see the faint scar at the base of his ear, a newer line that I had not noticed before, a fresh mark, perhaps a lingering reminder of a past battle. I met his gaze, the fire-crowned curl still tingling at my scalp, a gentle warmth that spread down my throat. "We're not done," I replied, the edge of my scientific curiosity mixing with a growing sense of partnership. "If the spores are still in the water runoff, they'll spread beyond this valley." He nodded, his jaw set. "We'll need to go deeper. The crystal's core is farther in, past the fissure you saw earlier. The blackthorns might be trying to tap into it." A sudden crack echoed through the cavern, a stone shifting from its ancient perch. Dust fell from the ceiling, a fine powder that settled on our shoulders. The sound was followed by a faint, melodic chime, an unfamiliar tone that seemed to echo the runes on Liam's blade. I glanced at the walls, noticing a series of shallow carvings hidden in the shadows, symbols that matched the spirals in my mother's journal but were interlaced with unfamiliar glyphs. "What are those?" I asked, my fingers tracing the grooves absent-mindedly. Liam crouched, his nose brushing the stone. He'd inhaled deeply, the scent of damp earth and iron filling his nostrils. "A warning," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Or a map." The carvings formed a pattern that converged toward a narrow tunnel on the far side of the chamber, a passage that seemed to lead deeper into the mountain. The air grew colder still, the scent of pine receding, replaced by a metallic sharpness that made my eyes water. I felt a shiver travel down my spine, a reminder of the death of my mother, the fire that had taken everything. I hesitated, the weight of the stone in my bag suddenly feeling heavier. "If we go in," I said, "we might not be able to turn back." Liam's eyes flickered, a flash of doubt crossing his expression before he steadied himself. "We can't turn back now," he said, the finality in his tone echoing the canyon walls. "The pack is counting on us. The blackthorns are already moving." I swallowed, the taste of pine and iron mingling on my tongue. I remembered the promise I had made to myself to remain invisible, to avoid the curse. Yet here, standing beside an alpha whose scar told stories of loss and survival, I felt the pull of something larger than fear. The fire-crowned curl prickled, a silent invitation. "Lead the way," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. I tucked the notebook into my coat, the pages rustling with the notes I'd taken, the margins filled with sketches of the fungus and the crystal's glow. The notebook felt like a bridge between my past, my mother's whispered legends, and this present, where I could finally test their truth. We moved into the tunnel, the narrow walls brushing against our shoulders, the floor slick with a thin film of ice. My boots crunched, each step sending a tremor through the stone. The lantern's flame sputtered, casting dancing shadows that played across Liam's face, illuminating the faint lines of exhaustion that traced his eyes. He walked ahead, his hand sliding along the wall for guidance, his grip firm but not overbearing. Occasionally, his fingers would brush against the rough surface, and I would feel the faintest vibration, as if the mountain itself were speaking through him. I found myself matching his pace, my own hand occasionally reaching out to steady myself against the cold stone, only to catch the edge of his sleeve, a brief contact that sent a jolt through my arm. We descended deeper, the air growing thicker, the scent of the crystal's resonance intensifying, a low hum that seemed to sync with the beat of my own heart. The tunnel opened into a larger cavern, the floor littered with shards of quartz that glittered like stars fallen from the sky. In the center stood a pedestal of ancient stone, atop which rested a larger crystal, its surface swirling with a vortex of blue light. The sight took my breath away. I could feel the hair on my arms rise, a mixture of awe and fear. My curls, still damp from the journey, seemed to sway subtly as if catching an invisible wind. Liam stepped forward, his silhouette dwarfed by the crystal's brilliance. He placed his hand on the pedestal, his palm pressing against the cool surface. "The prophecy," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "She-wolf with fire-crowned curls, this is it." I moved closer, my scientific curiosity battling the personal dread. "If we activate it," I said, "it could amplify our abilities. It could also destabilize the pack's balance." He turned his head, his eyes searching mine. In that instant, I saw the conflict roiling beneath his calm exterior, the duty to his pack, the fear of losing control, the sudden, uninvited pull toward me. He lifted a finger, tracing the edge of the crystal with his thumb, his breath fogging the surface. A faint crack sounded, and the crystal split, releasing a burst of azure light that washed over us like cold water. The light hit my curls, and for a heartbeat the fire-crowned mark flared visibly, a ring of flame curling around the base of my hair before dimming into a soft amber that seemed to settle into the stone. Liam winced, his hand recoiling as if the light had burned him. He took a step back, his shoulders tensing. I could see the scar on his jaw glinting in the sudden illumination, a reminder of wounds both physical and hidden. "Did you feel that?" I asked, my voice tinged with wonder. He nodded, his eyes narrowing. "It's not just a crystal. It's a conduit. It's reacting to something inside you." A low rumble began, the cavern shaking faintly, dust falling from the ceiling. The crystal's glow intensified, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls, forming shapes that reminded me of the spirals in my mother's journal. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone and ash, a combination that made my throat constrict. I felt my pulse surging, the fire-crowned curl on my scalp sparking again, this time with a brighter heat that tingled against my skin. I instinctively placed a hand on my head, feeling the faint vibration travel down my spine. The sensation was both terrifying and exhilarating, my body reacting to a power I had never understood, a link to a lineage I had tried to deny. Liam stepped forward again, his hand reaching toward me, but he stopped just short, as if an invisible barrier held him back. The space between us crackled with static, the air humming like a taut wire. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the pull between duty and desire, between the ancient pact and the new connection forming at this very moment. "Don't," I whispered, surprising myself. "If we both touch it, we might lose ourselves." He tightened his jaw, the scar catching a glint of light. "I can't let them." He stared at the crystal, then at me, his gaze softening. "I can't let the council decide what we become." His voice cracked faintly, the controlled alpha facade slipping. I saw the vulnerability there, the raw fear of losing control, the same fear that haunted my own thoughts of abandonment. In that instant, I realized we were mirrors, both trying to keep a dangerous secret, both terrified of the power that might betray us. The cavern trembled again, a deeper rumble that sounded like the mountain itself groaning. Cracks began to spider across the stone floor, dust raining down like ash. The crystal's light flickered, moments of brilliance interspersed with darkness, as if it were breathing. "We have to seal it," Liam said, his voice urgent now. "If the Blackthorns get to it, the whole valley could be A sudden sharp howl roared from the tunnel entrance, a sound that vibrated through the cavern walls. Figures emerged, shadows cloaked in dark furs, their eyes glinting amber. The Blackthorns had found us. Liam lunged, his body moving with a fluid grace that combined human precision and animalistic power. He let out a guttural growl, the sound resonating through the stone. I shoved the notebook into my pack, feeling the weight of my notes, my research, my past, all pressed against my chest. My hands trembled as I reached for the vial that still contained a few drops of the crystal's essence. The leader of the Blackthorns, a massive wolf with a scar across its nose, hissed, its nostrils flaring as it caught the scent of my fire-crowned mark. It lunged, teeth bared, heading straight for me. Instinct surged, and I flung the remaining liquid into the air, the spray catching the crystal's light and forming a shimmering mist that hung between us. The mist swirled, the blue-green particles mingling with the ash, creating a veil that seemed to dull the wolf's sight. Liam seized the moment, his claws extending, his fur bristling as he tackled the lead Blackthorn, sending both crashing into the crystal pedestal. The impact sent shards of stone scattering, the cavern filling with a deafening clang. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering, lungs burning. The fire-crowned curl on my head pulsed, a faint glow that illuminated the chaos. I could feel the crystal's power feeding into me, a surge that threatened to overwhelm my senses. I forced my mind to focus, recalling the equations I'd scribbled earlier, the way the fungus responded to temperature and light. I directed my breath, cooling the mist, coaxing it into a concentrated cloud that wrapped around the Blackthorns like a shroud. The leader snarled, threshing, but the mist seemed to paralyze its movements. It lunged again, this time its eyes locked on Liam. He roared, a sound that echoed off the cavern walls, a blend of human anger and animal ferocity. In that moment, his eyes met mine, pure, fierce, and unexpectedly tender. The world narrowed to the space between us, his hand reaching out, fingers trembling, the scar on his jaw glistening with sweat and blood. I saw the fear of losing control reflected there, the same terror that had driven me to hide my curls, to run from any connection. Yet I also saw something else, an earnest, raw need for partnership, for someone who could understand the weight of a mark. He placed his hand gently on my shoulder, the contact sending a shock of warmth through my spine. His palm was calloused, the skin rough from years of hunting, yet the pressure was soft, almost protective. The heat from his hand merged with the lingering ember on my curls, a sensation that felt like two fires meeting at a single point. "Don't let them take it," he whispered, his breath hot against my ear, the scent of pine and iron mingling. "We can." I cut him off, voice steadier than I felt. "We need to seal it, together." My fingers brushed the crystal fragment still embedded in my pack, the residual energy humming against my skin. He nodded, eyes flickering with resolve. Together we moved to the base of the pedestal, the shattered stone forming a jagged circle around us. I placed the vial's remaining drops onto the crystal's core, the liquid seeping into the fissure, merging with the blue light. The cavern sang, a low, resonant tone that seemed to rise from the mountain itself. The Blackthorns roared in frustration, the leader snapping its jaws, but the mist held them back, the strange fusion of my science and their primal magic creating a barrier. Liam stood beside me, his muscles taut, his presence a solid anchor in the swirling chaos. The crystal's glow began to dim, the blue light waning as the liquid sank deeper. A wave of cool air swept through the cavern, the scent of rain on stone replacing the metallic ozone. The tremor in the floor ceased, the shards of quartz settling back into place. We both exhaled, the sound heavy in the now quiet cavern. Liam turned to me, his face inches from mine, the scar on his jaw now a dark line against the pale light. His breath fobbed my cheek, his eyes reflecting the faint ember still dancing atop my curls. "You saved us," I said, voice soft, the words tasting like relief and something more. He shook his head, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You saved me," he replied, the banter in his tone laced with an intimacy that went beyond the battlefield. And the pack. A sudden crack echoed again, this time from above, a stone giving way somewhere deeper in the mountain. Dust fell, and a faint, low hum rose, a vibration that seemed to come from the very heart of the earth. I felt a cold draft slip through the opening, carrying with it the scent of distant water and the faint echo of a song I could not place. Liam looked toward the ceiling, his eyes narrowing. The ridge, someone's trying to force the crystal's power out, he said, tension tightening his jaw. I reached for his arm, my fingers finding the scarred skin, the roughness grounding me. We'll go together, I promised, the resolve in my voice matching the determination in his eyes. He gave a short, humor-tinged bark. I'd rather not get stuck between a rock and a well, you. The joke landed, the levity cutting through the lingering dread, but the underlying current of fear remained. We turned to leave the cavern, the path now illuminated by the faint glow of the remaining crystal shards. My curls brushed against Liam's coat, leaving a faint, lingering scent of singed cedar that seemed to cling to his fur. He inhaled, his eyes closing momentarily as if savoring the aroma, a subtle acknowledgement of the bond forming between us. As we emerged onto the ridge, the moon hung low, its silver light spilling over the pine-scented valley. The wind howled, carrying distant sounds of battle farther down the ridge, clashing steel, snarls, a faint cry that sent a shiver down my spine. The forest beyond seemed to pulse with an uneasy energy, the promise of more conflict looming on the horizon. Liam stopped, turning to face the valley, his silhouette a dark blade against the night sky. We have a chance now, he said, voice low but firm. If we can keep the crystal sealed, the blackthorns won't have the power to corrupt the waters. The pack can survive. I folded my arms around the notebook, feeling its weight against my chest, a reminder of the burden I carried. And if we fail? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. He stepped closer, the space between us charged, the night air thick with pine, smoke, and the faint ember of my curls. Then we'll die trying, he said, his tone carrying both defiance and something softer, perhaps a promise. The words hung between us, a fragile bridge over a chasm of fear and hope. I could feel the fire-crowned mark throbbing under my scalp, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to sync with his breathing. For a moment, the world narrowed to the sound of his heartbeat, the smell of his pine-laden skin, the taste of cold night air on my tongue. We turned back toward the pack's camp, the path ahead illuminated by lanterns flickering in the distance. The tension between us remained, a rope stretched taut, each step forward a test of whether we could bear the weight of each other's secrets. The promise of safety for the valley lay ahead, but the deeper promise of trust, of allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, still hovered like a low hum, waiting for the right moment to become a roar. The night air pressed against the canyon walls, thin and metallic, as I slipped the cracked crystal shard into the pocket of my coat. My breath fogged in quick bursts, each exhale tasting of pine resin and the faint ash that still clung to my curls. Liam stood a few paces away, his silhouette illuminated by the flickering lanterns of the pack's makeshift camp, the scar on his jaw catching the firelight like a warning sign. I could feel his gaze on the back of my neck, a weight that made my shoulders tighten. "Do we really think we can seal it with what we have?" he'd asked, voice slow, the words vibrating through the cold stone beneath our boots. His hand hovered near the leather satchel, then fell back, as if the mere thought of touching it might unleash something worse. I stepped forward, the crunch of frost-bitten gravel echoing my pulse. "The samples are stable. If we introduce the antifungal compound now, it should neutralize the spore field before it reaches the valley." I knelt, pulling the vial from my pack, the green liquid swirling like a restless tide. The scent of the compound hit my nose, a sharp, almost citrus note that cut through the lingering ozone. Liam's eyes narrowed, the silver gray flashing with a flicker of something I could only read as doubt. "Your science can't stop what the old pact was meant to contain," he muttered, the scar catching a glint as he shifted his weight. "The council will see this as betrayal the moment they hear the crystal pulse again." A low howl rose from the far ridge. thin and hungry, and a shadow slipped between the pines. One of the blackthorns, silver fur bristling, a fresh wound on its flank dripping a dark, tar-like blood. My hand trembled, the vial slipping an inch before I caught it. The creature's eyes locked onto mine, the amber pupils reflecting the lantern's flame, and for a heartbeat I saw the spiral sigil etched into its fur, a mirror of the one that had burned on my scalp. "Leave us," Liam growled, lunging forward, his claws shearing the underbrush. He snarled, the sound resonating through my bones, and I felt the familiar surge of fear rise like a tide in my chest. The pack's howls answered, a chorus that seemed to swallow my thoughts. I forced the compound into the crystal's fissure, the liquid hissing as it met the ancient stone. A tremor rippled through the cavern, dust cascades brushing my cheek. The crystal glowed brighter, a pulse that felt almost like a heartbeat, and the fire-crowned curl on my scalp tingled, the heat climbing up my spine. Liam stepped back, his hand gripping the edge of a broken column, the muscles in his forearm taut. "If this burns us, you'll keep running," he whispered, the words threaded with the old habit of pushing people away. The scar on his jaw throbbed, a reminder of battles fought alone. The blackthorn emerged from the shadows, its leader snarling, a dagger of bone clenched in its jaws. I glanced at the satchel inside, a folded map of the valley marked with an unfamiliar symbol, a dotted line leading to a hidden spring I hadn't yet explored. The scent of wet stone rose, mingling with the coppery taste of blood in my mouth. A sudden crack split the night, the ancient crystal fracturing, shards scattering like glass rain. Light exploded, blinding, and an echo of distant drums reverberated through the cliffs, a summons I could not place. I clutched the edge of the satchel, feeling the cold metal of a hidden lock snap shut. Liam's hand brushed my arm, a brief contact that sent a shock of heat through my curls. Then he turned away, disappearing into the darkness as if the night itself could swallow his doubts. I stood alone, the cracked crystal humming faintly, the fire-crowned mark flickering like a dying ember. The pack's council would soon demand answers, and the blackthorn's presence hinted at a deeper betrayal. My mind raced, the compound spilling over the stone, the unresolved map tucked in my pack, the echo of drums promising another war. The weight of the promise I'd made to myself to stay invisible pressed harder than any scar, and the question lingered. Can I let a single spark become a flame, or will I retreat into the safety of the shadows I've always known? I sit on the cold stone ledge of the cavern, the cracked crystal fragment tucked into the inner pocket of my coat, where it brushes against the wool of my sleeve. The air tastes of iron and pine sap, the latter clinging to my skin from the night's wind. My breath comes in short, frosty puffs that dissolve before they can reach the low ceiling. The faint hum of the crystal's residual pulse vibrates through the stone, barely audible over the distant drip of water that echoes like a metronome. I stare at the fissure where the crystal split, the jagged edge still glowing a sickly turquoise, as if it remembers the moment we tried to seal it. The lantern light flickers, casting a wavering amber glow across my notebook lying open beside me. My pen hovers above a page filled with half-finished equations, the ink still wet where I tried to model the fungus's reaction to the compound. My fingers trace the margin where I'd jotted a question in a tighter script, what triggers the secondary resonance. I tilt my head, listening for any sound beyond the cavern's size. The rustle of fur against stone reaches my ears, Liam's packmates moving deeper into the tunnels, their paws soft on the icy floor. A low growl rolls from the darkness behind me. I turn without moving my eyes from the crystal, my heart thudding against my ribs like a trapped animal. Liam steps into the lantern's circle, the scar on his jaw catching the light, making the wound look like a fresh cut despite the seasoned look of his face. His coat is damp where it brushes the water-slicked stone, and a trace of blood stains the edge of his fur. He leans on a broken column, his shoulders hunched, a subtle tremor in his hand that I notice before he speaks. "Did you find anything in the runoff?" he asks, his voice barely above the whisper of the wind sneaking through a crack in the cavern wall. There is a pause, a held breath, before he adds, "The council will want a report. They're already sending word to the ridge." I swallow, feeling the metallic taste of my own fear rise. The water's still contaminated, I say, the words more factual than reassuring. My eyes drift to the thin veil of mist that clings to the crystal's edge, the way it catches the lantern light and throws it back in ghostly ribbons. The spores are binding to the mineral deposits. If we don't neutralize them, the whole valley could be poisoned before sunrise. Liam steps closer, the scent of pine and his own lingering musk filling the space between us. He brushes a hand against the cracked stone, feeling the vibration with his fingertips. I notice his fingers go pale where they touch, a sign of the old magic still humming through his veins. He looks up, eyes meeting mine, and for a breath I think I see something else there, maybe curiosity, maybe something softer, the flicker of a man who has spent his life building walls. You were going to leave tonight, he says, the edge in his tone softened by the fact that he's not ordering me but stating a fact. You said you'd go back to the lab, that the data needed you. I let the lantern's light play across the curve of my cheek, the way the shadows hide the faint sweat on my brow. I can't just abandon the samples, I reply, the words slipping out with the precision of a scientist. If the Blackthorns get access to the crystal before we finish the antidote, they'll have a weapon the pack can't match. He draws a slow breath, the sound like wind through pine needles. And what about the pact? He asks, his gaze drifting to the scar on his jaw, as if tracking it could give him an answer. The elders will still demand I exile you. They'll point to the mark, the fire-crowned sigil, as proof that we're cursed. I feel the old ache in my chest tighten, the familiar knot of shame and fear that has followed my curls since childhood. I run a hand through the braid, feeling the roughness of my own hair, the faint singed scent that still lingers like a memory of a fire I never saw. I've carried that curse all my life, I say, voice steadier than I feel. I thought hiding it would keep people from seeing me. Maybe that's why I'm here, why I keep digging for answers. Because if I can prove there's a science, a reason, maybe the fear will lose its grip. He crouches, bringing his forehead close enough that the warmth from his breath kisses the side of my neck. I can smell the pine resin on his skin, a comforting earthiness that steadies my shaking hands. He places a palm on my shoulder, the pressure deliberate, grounding. The contact sends a shiver through my spine, as if the heat from his hand meets the ember still smoldering in my curls. We've both been holding on to lies, he murmurs, not looking at me, eyes fixed on the fissure. You think you can convince the council with data, but the council's eyes are closed by tradition. I think I can protect the pack by staying loyal, but my loyalty is a chain that keeps me from being what I need to be. I inhale sharply, the cold air filling my lungs, the way it rattles my ribs reminding me that I am still human, still vulnerable. What if we don't tell them everything? I suggest, the thought forming like a fragile bridge. What if we keep the cure hidden until we have proof that the crystal can't be used as a weapon? We could use the camp's hidden cave, only I and a few trusted hunters know it. We'll work there, away from the council's eyes. He lifts his head, the scar flashing as the lantern light catches it. For a moment, I see the pack's future in his eyes, the thin line of wolves waiting for a leader, the ancient stone altar they guard, the way the wind seems to press against the ridge, waiting for a decision. Your hidden cave, he repeats, a faint smile curving his lips. You always have a place to disappear to. I've never had that. I've always been the one others look to. He chuckles, a low rumble that vibrates through the stone. Maybe I could learn that. The sound of distant hooves reaches us, a muted thud that suggests the Blackthorns are moving along the ridge, perhaps testing the valley's defenses. A flurry of scent, the musk of a wounded wolf. The sharp bite of blood drifts across the cavern floor, and I realize the Blackthorns have found the opening we thought we'd sealed. The panic that once clenched my stomach loosens just enough for me to think clearly. There's a breach, I say, pointing toward a narrow fissure where the rock seems to have shifted, a dark opening that leads deeper into the mountain. Someone's forced their way in. If they get to the crystal, they'll use it to flood the valley. Liam's eyes narrow, the silver gray flashing like a blade. He steps forward, his claws digging into the stone, leaving faint scratches. The scent of his fur mixes with the pine in the air, an intoxicating blend that makes me dizzy. He turns his head, looking at me, and I can see the calculation behind his stare: strategy, fear, desire. "Then we fight," he says, voice firm. "Together." The words settle between us, heavy with the weight of every promise we've made and broken. I feel a heat bloom at the base of my scalp, the fire-crowned curl reacting to the surge of adrenaline, a faint glow that I can see reflected in the crystal's broken edge. It's not just a mark, it's a conduit, a key that hums with potential. I can feel it pulsing in time with my heartbeat, a rhythm that matches his breathing when he's near. The realization that my curse could be a weapon and a salvation knits tighter the knot in my chest, but also loosens it just enough to let hope slip in. I stand, the cold stone pressing against my legs, and pull my notebook close, flipping to a page where I've sketched the lattice of the crystal's internal structure. My hand trembles as I trace the lines, the ink smudging a little where my finger brushed it. "If we can redirect the energy through this conduit," I whisper, more to myself than to him, "the crystal could amplify the antidote instead of the enemy's rage." He watches me, his gaze softening. "You're willing to risk yourself for this, for the pack?" I meet his stare, the fire-crowned curl pulsing like a tiny lighthouse in the gloom. "I've been risking myself for years, hiding," I answer, the words tasting like ash. "Now I'm choosing to use what I have. If that means stepping into the fire, then I'll do it." He steps closer, the proximity sending a jolt of static through my skin, his warmth against my cheek, the faint trace of his scent, the faint crunch of his boots on the stone. He reaches out, his hand hovering just inches from my jaw, the scar catching a glint of lantern light. I can see the faint tremor in his fingers, a hesitation that betrays the fear of losing control, of letting someone else see the raw, unguarded part of him. "You've always been the quiet one, Ava," he says, voice low, "but you're not the only one who's afraid." The honesty of his words lands like a stone in a still pond. I feel a surge of something I've never allowed myself to name. Perhaps it is trust, perhaps an echo of longing that has been pinned down for too long. My fingers, still clutching the notebook, curl around the leather strap of my pack, the weight of the crystal fragment pressing against my back, a reminder that I carry something powerful and volatile. "We both have cages," I reply, my voice steady enough to convince myself. "Yours is the pact, mine is the curse. Maybe we can." Before I finish, a sudden crack reverberates through the cavern, a sharp, splitting sound that makes the dust drift down like snow. A piece of rock detonates from the far wall, revealing a dark silhouette slipping through the new opening. The Blackthorn Scout, its fur matted with blood, its eyes glinting amber, darts toward us, teeth bared, a jagged club clutched in its jaws. Liam's muscles coil like coiled springs. He lunges, his body a blur of fur and sinew, the scar on his jaw catching a flash of moonlight as he crashes into the intruder. I hear the thud of his body against the Scout's, the snarls that rise and fall like ocean waves. My heart hammers, the fire-crowned curl flaring brighter, the heat prickling at my temples. Instinct takes over. I fling the vial of the antifungal compound I'd prepared, the green liquid arcing through the air, catching the lantern's light and turning it into a phosphorescent spray. It lands on the Scout's snarling face, the mixture sizzling against its fur, a hiss that fills the cavern. The creature recoils, its eyes widening in bewildered pain, the club clattering to the stone floor. Liam's growl turns into a roar, a sound that shakes the very rock. He snaps his jaws around the Scout's throat, the pressure enough to bruise but not to kill, a display of dominance, a warning. The scent of blood rises, sharp and metallic, mixing with the pine and the lingering ozone. I watch the blood pool around the fallen Scout, the crimson spreading like ink on parchment. When the struggle ends, Liam steps back, breathing hard, the labored exhale fogging the cold air. He wipes a smear of blood from his jaw, the scar glistening wet. He looks at me, the feral intensity in his eyes softening to something almost tender. "We need to move," he says, voice cracked as if he's pulling himself apart and reassembling. "The council will be here soon, and the Blackthorns will send more. If we can get the crystal sealed and the antidote ready, we might buy the pack enough time." I nod, feeling the weight of my pack shift as I stand. The notebook tucked under my arm is still open, pages half filled with formulas that now feel like a lifeline. I glance at the cracked crystal fragment in my coat, the faint ember still pulsing at its edge. It feels like a heart beating in time with my own. "Take me to the hidden cave," I say, the words firm, the decision settled like a stone set in place. "We'll finish the antidote there. I'll work through the night, and you keep the pack safe. We'll meet at dawn and see if the council will listen." He pauses, the flicker of lantern light catching the outline of his jaw, the scar glinting like a warning sign. He seems to weigh the risk, his brow furrowing. Then he steps forward, his hand reaching for the strap of my pack, fingers brushing the leather. The contact is brief, but it sends a warmth through my forearm, an unspoken promise that he won't abandon me. "All right," he says, his voice a low rumble, "but if the council turns on us, we'll go our separate ways. No more secrets, no more hiding." I feel a lump rise in my throat, a mixture of relief and the old fear of abandonment. I meet his stare, the silver gray of his eyes reflecting the broken crystal's glow. "No more hiding," I repeat, the words feeling like a vow, even as I know the pact still looms over us like a storm cloud. We turn toward the hidden path that winds out of the cavern, the narrow opening leading to the ridge where the night air waits, cold and sharp. The pine trees loom ahead, their needles rustling like whispers. I can hear the distant howl of the pack, a call that seems both a summons and a warning. As we step into the darkness, the lantern's flame sputters, casting our shadows onto the stone wall, a wolf's silhouette beside a scientist's outline, intertwined yet distinct. The fire-crowned curl on my head seems to pulse in sync with the rhythm of my steps, a silent metronome that tells me I am finally choosing to face the fire rather than run from it. Behind us, the cavern mouth shrieks as a stone shifts, hinting that the Blackthorns have not given up. The sound reverberates through the tunnel, a reminder that the war is still out there, waiting for us to either seal it or be consumed by it. I glance back, the faint ember on my scalp still glowing, a promise that the danger is not over, but that we have taken the first step toward something that might be more than a curse. The cold in the council chamber smelled of smoked pine and damp fir, a stale musk that clung to my skin the moment I stepped through the iron-bound doorway. Flickering torches threw amber shadows across the stone benches, each one occupied by a gray-eyed elder whose faces were carved with the lines of 1,000 winters. I could hear the low thrum of their breathing, a rhythm that matched the pulse I felt in the back of my throat. Liam stood at the far end of the room, his shoulders squared against the weight of the gathered pack. The scar on his jaw caught the torchlight, a scarlet slash that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. He lifted his head, the silver gray of his eyes catching the firelight, and for a heartbeat the whole hall fell silent, as if the stone itself were holding its breath. "The crystal is fractured," the oldest elder croaked, his voice rasping like wind through dry leaves. "The Blackthorns will not wait for the valley to heal. If the shard is not sealed, the resonance will spread like a disease." I felt the notebook in my coat shift, the half-finished equations rustling against the leather. My fingers twitched, itching to pull out the page that held the ratio of copper to fungus that might neutralize the spore field. Instead, my hand found the folded map I had tucked away earlier, the one marked with a red X at a spring hidden behind a wall of basalt. The map's edge was frayed where I had torn it from an old town ledger, and a faint scent of iron lingered on the paper, as if the ink itself remembered the blood spilled there. "Lord Mercer," I began, my voice steady enough to disguise the tremor that threatened to shatter the glass of my composure, "the crystal's core still emits a frequency. If we introduce the antifungal compound directly into the fissure, we can dampen the resonance long enough for the valley to purge itself." A murmur rippled through the elders. One of them, a wiry wolf with a white patch over his eye, let out a low growl. You would trust a human's concoction over the ancient rites. The pact was sealed for a reason, child. Liam's jaw tightened, the muscles along his cheek rippling beneath his fur. He stepped forward, the sound of his boots echoing against the stone like a drumbeat. The pact was a protection, not a prison, he said, his tone low, barely louder than a whisper. If Ava's mark is the key, we must use it before the Blackthorns claim the crystal for themselves. I could feel the heat rising at the crown of my head, the fire-crowned curls seeming to flex against my scalp as if they sensed the accusation in the air. A sudden flash of memory surged my mother's voice, thin and urgent, whispering about fire that would either consume or save. The thought tangled with the scar on Liam's jaw, a reminder that his fear of losing control was as sharp as any blade. The council will not allow a human, the elder began, but a sharp bark cut him off. A younger wolf, lean and blood-streaked, burst through the doorway, his flank still slick with a dark, tar-like substance. He dropped to one knee, eyes wide, teeth chattering. The Blackthorns broke through the ridge. They have the sigil. He thrust a charred talisman toward the elders, the spiral of fire etched into its bronze surface, smoldering faintly. They're here. A cold draft slipped through the cracks of the ancient stone, carrying with it the sour scent of burning pine and the metallic tang of fresh blood. The brothers of the pack shifted, an uneasy rustle of fur against stone. Liam's ears twitched, the hairs along his spine standing on end as a low, guttural howl rose from the darkness outside, a warning that the valley itself was about to be torn apart. We cannot move the crystal now, the oldest elder hissed, his eyes narrowing. The seal will be broken. We must exile the one who bears the mark before the pack is undone. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a drum of dread. The scar on Liam's jaw seemed to flare, a thin line of blood seeping under his fur. He stepped toward me, the space between us shrinking to a breath's width. His palm brushed the back of my neck, the warmth of his hand a contrast to the chill that seeped from the stone floor. I could taste the pine resin on his skin, the faint bitterness of iron from his wound, and, for a fraction of a second, the fear that had driven me to hide my curls surged forward, fear of being abandoned, of being the cause of another's ruin. Liam, I whispered, the words slipping out like a prayer. If they exile me, the council will lose its only chance to understand the crystal. I have the data. He squeezed my shoulder, a tight, possessive pressure that made my breath catch. You think I care about data when the pack's survival hangs on the edge of a blade? His voice cracked, a raw edge threading through the command. You think my loyalty to the elders outweighs my duty to protect what we have built? The elders shifted, their eyes darting between us, the weight of centuries of tradition pressing down like a stone slab. One elder lifted a paw, the tip of his claw stained with the dark substance from the scout's talisman. The pact demands sacrifice, he intoned. The fire-crowned mark is a warning, not a promise. The words landed like a stone in a still pond, ripples spreading across the room. My mind raced to the hidden spring on the map, the place where the crystal's resonance might be diluted. I could hear the faint clink of Liam's chain, the metal of his collar catching the torchlight. The thought of him bound, forced to watch me walk away, ignited a fresh spike of panic, an echo of the abandonment I had fled from as a child. A sudden crash reverberated from the ridge rockfall, the sound of stone grinding against stone, the unmistakable roar of a collapsing wall. A plume of dust rose, and the scent of earth, raw and alive, filled the chamber. The younger wolf, still on his knees, let out a strangled whine as a splinter of rock struck his shoulder, blood seeping into the pine's slick fur. Liam hunched over the wounded scout, his claws gentle as he pressed a paw to the wound, his breath hot against the animal's flank. He looked up at me, eyes darkened with something that resembled both grief and resolve. I cannot betray my pack, he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate the stone itself. If I let you stay, I betray everything I have ever protected. The elders murmured approval, their heads bowing as if the decision had been ordained long before I was born. I felt the ember on my scalp flare, a sudden heat that prickled my scalp, the fire-crowned curl igniting in a silent scream. "I thought you trusted me," I said, the words tighter than a knot, the taste of copper on my tongue as my teeth clenched. "I thought we were." He raised a hand, palm open, the gesture both a stop and an invitation. "Ava, you are the one who chose to step into this world of myth and science. You chose to bring the cure, to risk everything. But I am the Alpha. My duty is not to a single soul, however bright that soul shines." His jaw clenched, the scar drawing a thin line of dark blood that seeped onto his fur. "You are marked, and that mark will bring war. The Council will see you as a threat, the Blackthorns will see you as a weapon." A howl rose from the darkness beyond the cavern entrance, a mournful sound that seemed to carry the weight of the Vala's grief. The younger wolf, his wound now bleeding freely, let out a guttural bark, a warning that the Blackthorns were already at the threshold, their silhouettes flickering like shadows against the fire-lit stone. I turned my gaze to the map still pressed against my chest, the red X pulsing like a heartbeat. The spring it marked lay beyond the ridge, hidden by a veil of basalt that only the crystal's resonance could soften. If I could reach it, I could finish the antidote and seal the crystal's power from within. The thought of fleeing, of taking the map and disappearing into the night, sparked a wild, desperate hope. But the scar on Liam's jaw throbbed, a physical reminder that his world was built on loyalty, on the weight of centuries of pact. His eyes met mine, a storm of fear and fury swirling behind the silver gray. He stepped forward, his massive form filling the small space between us, the scent of pine and iron mingling, the heat of his body pressing into my side. "Leave now, Ava," he said, voice a low grind, "and I will not stop you. Stay, and we both die." My breath caught, the cold air of the cavern turning to a thick, metallic fog in my lungs. The ember on my head pulsed again, a beacon of fire that seemed to sync with the distant thrum of the crystal's crack. The Council's oaths, the Blackthorn's assault, the hidden spring all converged into a single, impossible choice. I turned, my fingers closing around the edge of the map, the paper rough against my palm. The scent of pine, burnt cedar, and fresh blood clung to me as I slipped the talisman into my coat, the spiral of fire glittering in the torchlight. The wound on my finger bled a thin line, the iron taste sharp on my tongue. "Run," I whispered, more to the echo of my own heartbeat than to Liam, and the words fell into the cavern like a stone tossed into water rippling outward, shaking the ancient walls. The elders stared, their faces a mask of stoic resolve, while the howl outside grew louder, the wind howling through the ridge like a warning. I stepped back, my boots sliding on the slick stone, the weight of the crystal's fragment in my coat a constant, throbbing presence. Liam's hand reached for me, his fingers grazing the back of my neck, the brief contact sending a jolt of heat that sparked across my curls. He did not pull me back. Instead, his grip tightened for a heartbeat, then released, the palm falling to his side as if surrendering a burden too heavy to bear. The sound of the Blackthorn war drums echoed from the ridge, a deep, resonant beat that vibrated through the floorboards. The pack's wolves began to stir, their eyes glinting with a feral fire. The elders, faces set, turned their heads toward the entrance, ready to act on the ancient decree. I turned and fled, the map clutched against my chest, the scar on Liam's jaw phantom impression on my mind. Behind me, the torches dimmed, the howl rose, and the Council's chant, "No blood shall break the pact," filled the stone. The fire-crowned curl on my scalp flared one last time, a bright ember dancing in the darkness, as if daring the night to swallow me whole. I wake to the faint rasp of ice crystals cracking on the ridge's edge, the cold seeping through the thin fur of my own coat as if the stone itself were breathing. The wind has pushed the pine needles into a restless swirl around my boots, each step a soft scrape against the frozen ground. My breath forms a thin veil, and as it rises I taste the coppery tang of the recent wound on my thumb, the scar tissue still pink under the pale dawn. I glance down at the map pressed against my chest, its red X a promise I cannot yet decipher. The spring it marks lies beyond the basalt wall the elders swear no one dares cross. I pull the paper free, feeling the grain of the old parchment against my fingertips, the faint scent of old ink mingling with the pine sap clinging to my skin. The valley below is a quilt of shadows and mist, the river a silver thread disappearing into fog. I crouch, pulling the notebook from my satchel, the pages fluttering like restless moths. My pen hovers over the equation for the antifungal compound, the ink dry where I stopped last night. I scribble a new ratio, the numbers trembling as if afraid of the consequences. My mind, which usually parses spores and mineral content with clinical precision, keeps returning to the scar on my jaw that Liam left on the stone when he slammed his paw against the cavern wall. I see it not as a wound but as a reminder of the control I have been handed, a control I have never truly owned. A distant howl slides over the ridge, low and mournful, a sound that should belong to the pack but feels more like a warning from the mountains themselves. I tighten the straps of my pack, the leather biting into my shoulder, and set off toward the basalt wall. The earth under my boots shifts, loose gravel giving way to slick moss, each step a reminder that the ground is as unstable as my certainty. I pause at a fissure, the air above it humming with a low vibration that makes the hair on my arms stand upright. I press my palm to the cold stone, feeling the faint pulse travel up my arm, a tremor that mirrors the rhythmic thrum I hear in my own chest. The rhythm is not just the heartbeat of the valley, it is the echo of a fear that has lived in me since I was a child, the dread that any light I shine will be snuffed out by the very fire that marks me. I close my eyes, inhaling the scent of wet stone and the faint ember of cedar that still clings to my curls. The memory surfaces, my mother's voice, low and urgent, whispering that the fire would either consume or save. I had taken that as a curse, a reason to hide. Now, alone, the thought of fire feels less like a brand and more like a potential source of heat, a way to melt the ice around my own doubts. I draw a breath and push forward, nudging the basalt aside with a crowbar I found in an abandoned ranger's shed earlier, its metal cold, its surface etched with a faint, unfamiliar rune that seems to pulse when my fingertips linger. I scrape the stone, chips scattering like tiny glaciers, and a hidden cavity reveals itself, a narrow tunnel lined with a thin film of frost that glitters like powdered quartz. The tunnel exhales a cold gust that carries with it the metallic scent of iron and the faint, sweet perfume of wild lupine that grows in low valleys. My lantern flickers, casting a wavering amber glow that skitters across the walls, highlighting the grooves of the ancient carvings that run along the passage. I trace them with my thumb, their lines intersecting in a pattern that resembles the sigil that blazed on my scalp, a spiral of fire wrapped in thorns. They are not warnings. They are a map, a guide left by those who understood the power I now carry. I realize I have been studying the world through a scientific lens, cataloging data, but never considering that the symbols themselves might be a language my mother tried to teach me, a language I have ignored out of shame. A sudden crack reverberates behind me, the sound of another stone shifting. I spin, lantern raised, only to see a sliver of movement, a shadow slipping past the tunnel's mouth. A figure cloaked in the midnight of the forest, a hunter's coat tattered, carries a satchel that looks newly repaired. I cannot see the face, but the glint of a silver pendant catches the light, its shape familiar, another spiral, half burned, half etched. My pulse spikes, a cold rush of adrenaline pulling my thoughts toward the blackthorns, yet the figure does not raise a weapon. Instead, they drop a small, sealed vial onto a stone slab before disappearing into the darkness. The vial contains a liquid that shimmers with a pale violet hue, a substance I have not seen in any of my notes. I pocket it, the weight a promise of something beyond my own research, a possible ally or a new threat. I press onward, the tunnel narrowing until I can barely fit. The air grows still, the only sound the faint thrum of my own breathing and the distant drip of water echoing like a metronome. I reach a chamber where the floor is a smooth slab of basalt, its surface warm despite the cold outside. In the center, a shallow basin holds a pool of crystal water, its surface rippling with an inner light that makes the walls glow a soft teal. I kneel, letting the water kiss my palms, feeling the chill melt into a soothing warmth that spreads up my forearms. The water reflects my curls, the fire-crowned sigil now a faint, luminous ring that pulses in time with the water's surface. I dip a finger, and the water rises, forming a thin column that seems to rise toward the ceiling, then collapses in a silent splash. In that moment, the fear that has always driven me to hide fear of being a danger to those I care for softens into a quiet curiosity. I realized that my need to remain invisible was never about protecting others, it was a shield for my own fragile self-esteem, a way to keep the world from seeing the ember that could burn me as readily as it could light me. I stand, feeling the stone under my boots, and for the first time in years I let the thought of failure sit beside the possibility of success. I pull the notebook from my pack, turning to a blank page. I write not a formula, but a question. What if the fire within me is not a curse, but a catalyst? I sketch the spiral, its lines intersecting with the basalt glyph and the hunter's pendant, noting the similarities. My eyes drift to the entrance where the hunter vanished. The silence there feels like an invitation, a test I have not yet taken. I tuck the vial of violet liquid into my satchel, its glow faint against the dark fabric, and make my way back to the ridge, each step lighter than the last, as if the weight of the old pact has loosened just enough for me to move without the need for Liam's shadow to guide me. Halfway down the slope, I hear the distant clang of metal, perhaps a Blackthorn's patrol, perhaps an old ranger's trap. I pause, the wind whipping the pine needles against my face, carrying the scent of smoke that smells oddly like the campfire I left behind. My mind returns to the council's decree that I am a threat, and I feel the old knot tighten. But instead of cowering, I press the map to my chest, the red X now a beacon I can see through the fog. I realize the path I have taken is not one that must end in exile or sacrifice. It is a route I have chosen for myself, driven by the desire to understand the fire that lives in me, not to hide from it. The sky lightens, pink bruises spreading across the horizon. I reach the edge of the ridge just as the sun breaks over the treetops, spilling amber across the valley. From my perch I see the pack gathered below, Liam standing at the front, his silver-gray eyes scanning the horizon, his scar catching the first light. He does not look directly at me. His gaze is fixed on the far ridge where the blackthorns are now a silhouette against the sunrise. I watch his shoulders tense, the way his jaw sets, and for a heartbeat I feel the old ache of longing, but I let it pass like a breath of wind. I turn my back to the pack, facing the open valley, the wind whistling through the pines, the scent of pine sap rising with the heat of the day. I pull the violet vial from my satchel, feeling the cool glass against my palm, and watch the liquid swirl, catching the sunrise in its depths. I know I have a choice to make alone, to bring this unknown substance to the council and risk their wrath, or to keep it hidden, a secret weapon that could tilt the balance of power. I close the vial, hearing a faint click that sounds like a promise, and slip it into a hidden pocket of my coat, a decision made without Liam's approval, without anyone's expectation. The day stretches ahead, the valley alive with the rustle of leaves, the distant roar of a river, and the subtle hum of the crystal's lingering resonance. I feel the fire-crowned curl at the back of my head twitch, a quiet pulse that matches the rhythm of my stride as I begin the descent toward the camp, not as a scientist seeking validation from an alpha, but as a woman finally willing to let the ember within guide her own path. The ridge greets me with pine needles that crackle under my boots as the first amber light spills across the valley, turning the river into a ribbon of molten gold. Liam stands a few paces away, his gray coat catching the sunrise and casting a thin line of light on the scar that runs the length of his jaw. A stray curl lifts from my braid, the ember-crowned tip trembling like a quiet flame in the wind. I dug up the council's ledger in the old chapel, I say, pulling a dust-caked book from my satchel. The leather spine is split, the pages brittle with age, and on one faded leaf a rune matches the spiral carved into the cavern wall we left behind. Liam's silver eyes flicker over the symbol, a recognition humming between us. Without a word, Liam steps forward, his massive paw pressing the frozen earth and sending a low tremor up through the stone. He inhales the sharp scent of pine mixed with the metallic tang of blood that still clings to his fur from the recent skirmish. "We can rewrite the oath," he murmurs, voice low enough that the valley seems to hold its breath. From beneath my coat I pull the violet vial the cloaked stranger slipped into the hidden tunnel. The liquid glows faintly, humming against the glass. I uncork it, and the scent of crushed lavender and ozone spills into the cold air. "This will neutralize the spore field in the river," I explain, pouring the contents onto a stone slab we carved as a makeshift altar. The violet mist spreads, seeping into the cracks, and a soft blue pulse radiates outward, dimming the lingering resonance of the crystal. Liam places his ceremonial dagger etched with ancient runes against the slab, the blade catching the mist and reflecting it like a second sun. Together we press, and the stone sighs, the old magic yielding to our combined will. A distant howl rises, not the blackthorn's war cry but the mournful whine of a lone wolf that followed us from the pack, its fur streaked with ash. The creature pads to the edge of the light, eyes fixed on me, and the old fear of abandonment loosens as it steps closer, trusting my presence. "I won't let the council exile you," Liam says, his breath warm against my ear. He slides his fingers beneath my braid, the ember tip tingling against his palm, a deliberate promise forged in the same fire that once threatened to consume us. I spread the map on the stone, the red X marking the hidden spring glowing bright, but newer markings, symbols I never saw before, lead away toward the basalt wall we never explored. Both of us glance at that fresh line, aware that another secret still waits in the shadows. We stand side by side, sunrise spilling gold over our shoulders, the valley waking below. The pact has been broken, the crystal sealed, but the river still runs thick with spores, and a shadowed figure watches from the tree line, unseen. I turn to Liam, hand resting on his scarred jaw, and whisper, "We move forward together." He nods, his grip tightening, and together we step into the light, the unknown waiting just beyond the ridge. She senses the faint echo of a drumbeat from the Blackthorns' camp, a rhythm that foretells another assault. The hunter's pendant still glints in her mind, a clue to an alliance she has not yet pursued. Their footsteps echo, promising a future where science and pack walk as one.